Close your eyes and imagine a queen who once held sway over vast stretches of Europe, yet whose very breath could send ambassadors reeling like poisonous fumes escaping from a charnel pit. Her regal smile revealed teeth so blackened and brittle they crumbled like a rotting tree trunk. Her once fiery red hair had become a writhing nest of maggots, the pale larvae burrowing into her scalp day and night, devouring every strand of her elaborate wigs. And that magnificent gold-plated bathtub? It was little more than a rancid broth of wilted petals and congealed sweat, its surface coated with oily scum that unleashed a sharp, acidic stench straight to your lungs. This is no excerpt from a medieval horror tale. It is the grim reality lurking behind the crown of one of England's most celebrated monarchs. She had forced popes to tremble, foiled assassination plots, and overseen an age of exploration. Yet behind closed doors, her flesh was betrayed by layers of toxic perfume, lead-eye-based cosmetics, and a paralyzing dread of revealing any trace of vulnerability. Shakespeare may have immortalized her brilliance, but even his pen could not capture the blood-curdling screams of her ladies-in-waiting as they watched her skin slough off in ulcerated patches, oozing, foul-smelling discharge. In today's video, we will strip away this veneer of powdered vanity to expose the most revolting hygiene practices ever documented in the royal chronicles. You will discover why her putrefied teeth inspired outright terror at court, how her wigs became breeding grounds for insects, and why her chemically saturated skin flaked away like fish scales. These were not mere eccentricities, but the horrifying byproducts of fear, ambition, and the relentless pressure to maintain an unblemished public image. Before we embark on this unsettling journey, let me know where you're tuning in from in the comments, and if you're prepared to confront these dark truths. Please hit like and subscribe so you won't miss any of history's untold secrets. Are you brave enough? Let's dive in. And now, as we have closed our eyes and envisioned the Queen's putrid breath and her gilded mask of vanity, let us follow that European ambassador into the grim reality behind the throne's true radiance. In the late 1502, beneath flickering candlelight dancing on gilded walls, the ambassador, cloaked in fine silk, glided through the opulent corridors. Each of his footsteps echoed on the marble floors like echoes in a dream, while a solemn carpet, embroidered with the English lion, stretched regal and unbroken beneath him. At the end of the hall stood a jade inlaid throne, its carvings so exquisitely detailed that the visitor felt he was about to meet an angel rather than a mere mortal. When the great hall's doors swung open, a dense wave of air rose like the stifling breath of a mummified corpse. No sooner had he lifted his gaze than a whisper ran through his mind. It's not the scent of flowers, but the scent of decay. The Queen appeared, majestic and upright, her stride confident and her eyes alight with power. Her voice was warm and honey-sweet, yet the very first syllable unleashed a horrific stench that swept through his nostrils, making him flinch and his eyes water. But that foul odor was only the beginning. As she offered a regal smile, her jagged teeth revealed themselves like a tiny grave set in her chalk-white visage. Her teeth were yet black, enamel flaking away like rotted wood, clinging to her gums like decaying branches. Many attendants who witnessed the sight cried out, begging to treat her, but their pleas vanished into the cold air as swiftly as morning mist. Elizabeth I was fiercely proud and believed that pain was weakness. From her 20s on, she had been enthralled by the sweet taste of sugar imported from her Caribbean colonies. Sugar was a symbol of status, a luxury reserved for the elite. She indulged herself without restraint, combining it with honey to protect her teeth, yet honey is a feast for bacteria. Over time, every golden drop destroyed her enamel, causing her teeth to fall out until only pointed black stumps remained along her jaw. By her 40s, chewing had become torture. Soft bread was barely tolerable. Tough meat had to be boiled until it melted in the mouth before she dared swallow. The royal chefs were forced to puree every dish into a gruel so that she need never chew a bizarre spectacle amid tables of gilt, crystal, and fine wines. Even impeccably dressed dignitaries exchanged glances in silence. I'm afraid to mention her missing teeth. One day, a brave court dentist proposed extracting her loosest tooth to relieve her agony. Elizabeth nodded but laid down a bitter condition. You must pull one of your own first. If I feel pain, you must feel it too. In a makeshift operating chamber, before the assembled court, the dentist bit back a cry as he extracted his own tooth, blood glistening under candlelight. When he screamed, bled, and fainted, the assembly turned away, while Elizabeth merely offered a cold smile and swept out, leaving only his groans and the metallic tang of blood lingering in the air. This is no fiction. Chroniclers recorded every horrifying detail, chilling later readers. Many elder courtiers, recalling the tale, exclaimed, "I've never smelled anything so dreadful. Blackened, rotting teeth, receding gums, relentless agony, all because she refused to show weakness." To Elizabeth, the image of power had to be flawless in every respect, even at the cost of her flesh being eaten away, hour by bacterial acids and decaying enamel. While her glory resounded across Europe, a few knew that every regal smile concealed the rot beneath. Countless portraits, woodcuts, and letters conspired to hide her agony. Court artists were ordered to paint her with perfect white teeth, and any complaint she voiced was locked away as the court's deepest secret. She turned silence into a weapon, and each decayed tooth deepened the terror among her foes. Now you understand why the Queen's smile was not a symbol of joy but a haunting warning. Power may conceal everything, but it cannot erase the stench of decay that lurks beneath the splendor. In the next chapter, we will venture into another dark obsession, her reliance on perfume and bizarre bathing rituals, where each solution only worsened her plight. Prepare yourselves, for more horrifying twists lie ahead. And when the royal nose-plugging ritual commenced, Elizabeth devised a covert protocol to conceal her putrid breath, as if she were a fastidious sorcerer preparing arcane charms. Before each banquet, she ordered her ladies-in-waiting to pick the freshest rose petals from the walled garden blooms, long esteemed as emblems of beauty and authority. After soaking these petals in intensely scented perfume, she tucked them between her teeth whenever she spoke or smiled, releasing a pleasant aroma that also carried a sugary coating, which in turn hastened the decay of her enamel. But that was not all. She also chewed cloves and cardamom, precious spices imported from India and Southeast Asia, believing their sharp, pungent bite could mask the stench of rot. In ancient medicine, cloves were hailed as a cure-all for their antiseptic properties, and cardamom imparted a cool freshness that seemed to banish foul odors. Yet this penchant turned her mouth into a garish spice cabinet that both horrified and intrigued visiting ambassadors. They wondered, could a court so majestic truly endure a monarch chewing potpourri all day? To lend an air of solemnity, Elizabeth used silver-plated cutlery metal, long believed by common folk to possess antibacterial powers. In truth, silver has only mild germ-fighting properties and could not absorb the overpowering stench. At state dinners, when she lifted a gleaming silver fork, the guests imagined they would witness the perfect hands of royalty, but moments later, a stifled cough would ripple through the diplomatic corps, like the throne itself sighing in dismay. One ambassador even confided in a secret letter to Vienna that her mouth resembles a tiny graveyard, sending shivers through Europe's diplomatic academies. As her teeth further deteriorated, her speech grew increasingly slurred, and Shakespeare himself was said to have rewritten lines in his plays to avoid unpalatable words. It is said that during performances of A Midsummer Night's Dream, whenever the actress playing the Queen encountered the word Queen, he would abbreviate it or replace it with Reign, sparing her the effort of pronunciation. Thus, London audiences remained enchanted by the drama, unaware that behind the scenes the real sovereign was enduring excruciating dental agony. Over time, Every court banquet became a silent drama. She would raise her goblet in a strained smile before wood-graving and ink-black cameras, then slip behind a screen in silence. The clink of shattered porcelain and the soft clatter of crystal echoed alone, while the rancid odor seeped through cracks in the draperies. Clinging to guests' stomachs, they feigned delight in conversation, though inwardly they regretted ever inviting her. Many of her attendants, upon leaving service, recorded these horrifying moments. In a private memoir, Lady Margaret Houghton wrote, "I served Her Majesty for more than 10 years, yet not a day passed without my spine tingling as I cleared the empty plates after a feast. Her breath's stench clung to my clothes and bedding, haunting my nostrils still. Though these accounts lie locked away in private archives, they suffice to make descendants shudder. Yet one detail remains little known. Elizabeth also employed a mouthwash concocted from vinegar, wine, and dried orange peel, a recipe traced back to ancient Roman medical texts. This mixture was diluted and swished around her mouth, imparting a cool sensation. But the acid in the vinegar and the tannins in the orange peel actually eroded her fragile enamel even faster. The result was teeth not only rotting but turning brittle, crumbling like eggshells. These seemingly bizarre hygienic practices reveal not only her terror of appearing weak, but also her unyielding thirst for power and a flawless public image. Elizabeth chose silence. Masks of scent and makeup. Yet nothing proved strong enough to cover the creeping decay by the hour. The magnificent palace was but a facade. Behind it, her flesh was slowly disintegrating. Now that you can taste the pungent clove, feel the cool bite of cardamom, and smell the sharp vinegar in her mouthwash, prepare for the next chapter, the dark world of perfumes and toiletries that bound Elizabeth in an even stranger obsession. Do not look away, for the secret of her shattered bathtub and rotting petals will prove far more horrifying still. Let us continue this journey, and when rose petals, cloves, and cardamom proved insufficient to mask the fetid stench within, Elizabeth opened yet another haunting chapter, a terror of water more profound than any fear of snakes that turned the mere act of bathing into her greatest nightmare. From her youth, Elizabeth had heard rumors that water could seep through the skin, penetrate the pores, and never fully evaporate, leaving the body drowned in perpetual dampness like an ancient mummy. Even the palace physicians whispered warnings in her ear. "Your Majesty, if water reaches your soul, 1,000 ills will follow." Gradually, she came to believe that each bath risked her very life, akin to suicide by the element meant to sustain it. Rather than standing under a shower or sinking into a tub like other noble women, Elizabeth commanded her ladies-in-waiting to prepare gold-plated bathing vessels, luxurious, yet used solely for sitting, never washing. These tubs were lined with fresh rose petals, jasmine blossoms, and dahlias, precious imports from France, India, and the Middle East, celebrated for their intense fragrance and gentle cleansing in contemporary belief. Then she added apple cider vinegar, rich rose water, and white champagne to blend with her body odor, transforming the bath into a liquid perfume. She would sit with closed eyes, letting the rancid brew mingle with the vinegar's tang, the wine's sweetness, and the lingering floral notes against her skin. No scrubbing, no friction. Around her, the ladies wore 6 layers of heavy garments, tight corsets, brocaded shifts, multiple petticoats to keep in warmth and shield her flesh, trapping every bead of sweat. That sweat pooled into the perfume in the tub, creating a rancid symphony only her most loyal attendants could endure. Many of them slipped out through windows to escape the choking air. None dared complain, fearing rebuke or charges of disloyalty. Each time the bath was drawn, the ladies trembled in awe and dread. They brought trays of face powder, bowls of perfume, and feathered fans, but none dared to rub her skin. Instead, they dipped a cloth lightly into the mixture, and gently dabbed her neck, shoulders, and wrists under the guise of softening the fragrance, truly attempting to stop the bathwater from seeping back into her skin. You could hear their hushed voices. "We must not touch the queen's flesh, or we will share her endless damp fate." End. And that bathwater was never replaced, only topped up with more perfume and oil when it turned murky. It is said that after days without fresh water, the liquid in the tub darkened to a brownish hue, thick with floating, wilted petals and a film of rancid oil. Anyone passing by would cough and bow. Braving the odour, Elizabeth sat motionless amid her royal tub, her hooded eyes fixed on the mirrored walls and portrait frames of her ancestors. Sometimes she gazed upward, recalling youthful abandon under the Bentham Falls near the Bath Palace, never imagining that now. A single drop of pure water could unleash such horror. But it was not only the ladies who shuddered. The royal physicians once proposed alternatives. They offered baths in mare's milk, mineralmut, or dry scrubs with coffee grounds, but Elizabeth shook her head, calling such remedies crude and unrefined. Instead, she believed the more she avoided water, the more she preserved her scented veil of power. A queen must never be soaked, she declared, for water will wash away her spirit. However, her life became a series of rituals. Each morning, a maid would bring a carafe of wine mixed with vinegar and essential oils. Another of fresh roses and lotus petals, the fragrance of state, unleashed the moment the bathroom door creaked open. The drip of a brass spout, the squelch of oils stirred in the bath. Then her curt command, "Draw the queen's bath again." They had to prepare more chemicals to conceal the horror, not to cleanse. One famous lady in waiting once sighed, "We bathe in foul wine, seated in our own rotting past." Carved into a handwritten journal, this lament stands as proof that even amid splendor, the queen was tormented by her weakness, ensnaring her body in a self-destructive spiral. Indeed, over 4 decades of rule, Elizabeth avoided water so thoroughly that a moisture barrier wall was built in the palace. Yet no one can flee water forever. Modern medical records warn that prolonged avoidance of bathing in damp climates can lead to dermatitis, fungal infections, and open sores. But the Queen held fast to her anti-water power, and no one dared contradict her. Now that you have felt Elizabeth's obsession with water, from her dread of its penetration to her bizarre, unrefreshed baths, prepare for the next chapter, where we will explore her fixation on cosmetics and lead-based powders, the final weapons she wielded to hide the decay spreading within. The palace may don a mask of grandeur, but inside, her flesh continued to rot. The journey still holds many horrifying twists. Do not look away. And when those perfume baths and withered petals could no longer conceal the signs of rot, Elizabeth opened an even more horrifying chapter. Porcelain white makeup, known as Venetian ceruse, a refined lead powder blended with white vinegar, lauded as the armor of Western noblewomen. Her intention was clear: to hide the deep pockmarks of smallpox on her cheeks and preserve a smooth, alabaster complexion under candlelight, so that each portrait would gleam like porcelain. Yet with every fresh layer of ceruse, the very toxicity of the lead tore at her fragile skin, revealing flaking flesh, ulcerations, and raw, burning patches beneath. In truth, Venetian ceruse had been fashionable among Europe's elite since the 16th century for its ageless skin effect in dim light. What they did not advertise, however, was that white lead is a potent neurotoxin, absorbed through the skin and accumulated deep within the body. Elizabeth, in her vanity, ignored this fact entirely. She saw only the unsightly scars, and each time she gazed into a mirror, she applied yet another layer of powder, whispering to herself, "Let them see purity, never what lies beneath." But her skin could not endure forever. Every fresh coat of ceruse left her skin brittle and cracked, pustule protruding, oozing yellow fluid, and thick flakes of dead skin clinging to her fingertips. The royal physicians, devoted yet anxious, presented dozens of remedies, infusions of sage leaves steeped in wine, balms made from pine resin, mineral water mixed with aloe vera. They hoped to soothe her ulcers and reduce inflammation, but each time they offered a treatment, Elizabeth's eyes would flash with fury as she thundered, "You are a witch in disguise. I need no counsel from you." Then she would command the physician's immediate expulsion from court, leaving behind a single tear of worry and the faint scent of unutilized medicine. Beneath that chalky veneer, her flesh decayed slowly. Taut skin gave way to crumbly patches, old scars and fresh sores etched in relief beneath the white mask. Yet on grand occasions, she still appeared proud and composed, her figure slender in a glittering gown, while the audience beyond saw only an immortal icon, unaware that every line on her face was evidence of chemical ravages. Court painters received orders to retouch her portraits, softening her smile, whitening her teeth, blurring any trace of damage, because even half the truth might rock the throne. Few realized the extent of her obsession. Elizabeth did not limit Venetian ceruse to her face, but applied it to her neck, back, and décolletage to create an effect of snowy whiteness. In court gossip, she was nicknamed the walking snowflake, for wherever she moved, a pallid glow followed. It is said that once, at an outdoor banquet, moonlight struck her powdered skin and caused it to shine like an artificial moon. Yet those peering from behind veils saw only tears tracing down her flaking cheeks, her neck trembling with pain. Modern medical literature confirms that prolonged lead exposure causes chronic lead poisoning, fatigue, cognitive decline, muscle spasms, even hypertension and kidney damage. Caught in the euphoria of power, Elizabeth had no inkling. She was slowly destroying her own brain and organs. Perhaps the bouts of unexplained dizziness and occasional collapses on public stages were the first symptoms of lead toxicity, recorded by historians only as the Queen's mysterious exhaustion. Still, she insisted on preserving her aura of glory. Once, when a young prince came to pay homage, Elizabeth drew back her curtain in greeting only for him to turn away in silence. A lady-in-waiting whispered urgently, "My lord has not yet seen her true face. But trust me, he will never forget this powder's scent." Soon, many noble youths sought her favor by gifting jars of refined white chalk, lead-free powder so costly it was impractical for daily use. Legend says that, at a formal ball, crystal chandelier light struck Elizabeth's powdered skin, and the ceruse cracked into tiny razor-sharp fissures. Guests blew out their candles, yet the light continued to flicker through the cracks, which they imagined as starlight reflections, all except one attendant who recognized that it was Elizabeth's skin shattering under the strain of her own dress. No matter how radiant she appeared, the image of the chalk-white queen was but a camouflage. Beneath, muscle and bone were decaying day by day as lead seeped into her blood, ravaging her brain and skeleton. It was only at her deathbed that her generals realized all their adulation had been for a hollow illusion. For the Venetian ceruse's legacy had eroded her hard-earned strength, hollowed her sternum, withered her trembling hands, and stiffened her knuckles with lead-induced convulsions. Now that you have witnessed the decaying form beneath that chalky white mask, prepare for the next chapter, where we will uncover how wigs and hair powders concealed the horror of her scalp. This gruesome journey is far from over, and the truth behind Elizabeth's armor of glory will prove more haunting than ever. And when the chalk-white ceruse could no longer conceal the rot on her face, Elizabeth turned to another part of her body to preserve her legendary beauty. Her hair, yet even her splendid wigs held horrors of their own. Just past her 30th birthday, Elizabeth began to notice her once vibrant red locks thinning. The so-called miracle dyes, laced with lead and mercury, that she had used to maintain their hue, were killing her hair follicles, and poisoning her scalp. With each genuine strand that fell away, a raw sore appeared on her scalp. Weeping blood and pus, the court physicians begged her to abandon the toxic dyes, but Elizabeth only shook her head. "Without my red hair," she declared, "I would not be myself. Instead, she commissioned the finest hair artisans to fashion dozens of elaborate wigs. The raw materials were so exceptional that European nobility gasped in envy: sturdy horsehair, resilient goat hair, and even the tresses donated by court ladies or gathered from the recently deceased. Each wig was painstakingly woven on a steel mesh framework, sculpted like a work of art, before being affixed to her scalp with a homemade adhesive, a blend of flour, egg yolk, animal fat, and secret royal essences. That adhesive provided an unbreakable bond, but at a terrible cost. Every time a wig was removed, patches of fragile new skin tore away with it. Underneath the weight of those colossal coiffures, some tipping the scales at several kilograms, the skin was crushed, oxygenustarved, and soon developed dry, cracked flakes and necrotic ulcers. Attendants could hear the frame's occasional clink as it scraped her skull. And when old wigs were finally taken off, a sour, metallic stench would rise from the peeled-back adhesive. To mask the nauseating odor of rotting flesh and glue, Elizabeth dusted her wigs in white Venetian ceruse, giving the illusion of a seamless platinum crown, but beneath that powder lay a thriving parasite kingdom. Mites, lice, and maggots proliferated unchecked. Within each wig bundle, every single hair strand served as an ideal habitat, nourished by moisture and scalp oils. According to a seldom cited 1,585 account, one lady in waiting decided to wash an old wig and was horrified to find hundreds of tiny lice crawling free, a gruesome spectacle that left her pale and trembling whenever she retold the tale. Elizabeth's only confidant at court, Lady Anne Stafford, recorded in her diary, "On the day Her Majesty received a new wig, the hairdressers removed the old one. I watched as the mass of hair fell, revealing wriggling clusters of parasites squirming across the mesh. I dared not breathe deeply, for fear they would cling to my gown." That memory of the rancid odor of spoiled adhesive, decaying scalp, and insect droppings haunted Stafford for the rest of her life. The towering wigs themselves became symbols of authority. Some reached nearly a meter high in arched structures, festooned with pearls and plumes. A few even incorporated steel wires bent into crown shapes, making Elizabeth appear like an Eastern goddess. Yet the immense weight left her neck throbbing and her shoulders shaking. Each descent down the palace's grand staircase required a wooden support scaffold to bear the load, as if she were being carried in a portable throne. Despite the agony, no one dared object. To criticize Elizabeth's hair or lament, a stray lock on the chamber floor was tantamount to treason. It was said that to clip a wig in reproach was a sign of disloyalty. Several palachvigmokers, dragged before the Privy Council for stray hairs, were imprisoned without trial, their fates unknown. Courtiers, witnessing such scenes, would silently avert their eyes and resume their duties as though wearing regal crowns themselves. Beyond adhesive, Elizabeth once attempted to deodorize her wigs by airing them over cold coals, hoping to kill parasites. But the embers never got hot enough to destroy lice eggs. Sometimes the smoke only aggravated her scalp ulcers. After each failed fire bath, she would slap on another layer of white powder, desperately concealing the deep crimson of her raw skin. The longer and loftier her wigs grew, the more they stifled airflow to her scalp. To compensate, her attendants wielded fans ceaselessly, creating a feigned breeze that stirred dust into the hair. They burned incense around her throne to smother the stench. Yet instead, they concocted a suffocating melange of smoke and fragrance that clung to the wigs like a horrifying charm. In Elizabeth's final months, her wigs became an unbearable burden. Rumour claimed she had to don a massive iron skullcap beneath her hairpiece like a warrior's helmet before battle to stabilise the frame. Those iron caps, with their tightened straps, made her dizzy and nauseous. When she collapsed during a private council meeting, attendants quietly drew the curtains to hide the tragic scene from prying eyes. Today, historians estimate that Elizabeth owned over 80 distinct wigs during her reign. Each cost thousands of pounds sterling, a massive fortune in its day, but a pittance compared to the price she paid. A rotting scalp, rampant parasite, and ever a deepening isolation. She spent hours in her dressing chamber, a living machine of self-destruction beneath a facade of glory. Only when she lay on her deathbed was her final wig removed. Dozens of hairpieces fell away in a cascade, peeling off strips of ulcerated scalp and leaving gashes that bled incessantly. The royal physicians looked on in horror. They dared not cleanse her wounds with water. Her terror of bathing persisted to the end. Instead, they gently bound her head in silk cloth perfumed with rosewater, hoping to ease her pain, yet unable to banish the sour tang that lingered. And when the horror of the parasite kingdom hidden in her wigs was fully revealed, Elizabeth refused to relent. Instead, she elevated the morning ritual of donning her wigs into a sacred ceremony, an intertwining of political power and religious faith to affirm her immortal image before all her subjects. At dawn's first light, in her vast private chamber, panelled with ebony, two ladies-in-waiting clad in pearl-white silk knelt in silent reverence. Three guards, clad in identical iron-grey uniforms, stood at rigid attention in a circle, and between them all an elderly priest in a black succhetto held a silver-edged aspergillum gleaming by candlelight. Only the measured breathing of the ritual party filled the room, until the priest intoned a Latin blessing, invoking sacred purification to clear the way for the holy wig to crown the Queen's head. That wig was first rinsed in holy water and rose water, then anointed with sacred frankincense oil, a symbol of authority and purity. A maid presented a white linen cloth scented with attar to dry it, before gently tilting the wig onto a mother-of-pearl swivel stand where a custom-made steel frame awaited. Next, the three guards lifted the wig in unison and painstakingly placed it atop Elizabeth's head, clipping it into specialized hooks mounted along her skull. Each click of the hook, once secured, sounded like a solemn reminder of the heavy responsibility resting on her crown. On occasion, the wig was so enormous that the palace's pristine archway had to be widened by 2 meters to allow the crown to pass without collision. It was said that one day, royal engineers chiseled away stone walls until midday, just to clear space for a single colossal hairpiece. And when a wig approached 10 kilograms in weight, Elizabeth donned a curved steel collar along her collarbones to balance the burden. That iron neckpiece, though jewelled with emeralds, forced her to tilt her head with every step, as if bearing the weight of the realm upon her shoulders. Yet the greatest agony came from the hundreds of hairpins, each over 2 inches long, with polished silver heads driven deep into her scalp to anchor the frame. As the ceremony leader hammered each pin home, one could faintly hear the crack as the metal pierced her delicate skin, accompanied by tiny beads of blood. This scene was described only in hushed passages of the court chronicles and private diaries. Her Majesty sat motionless, her eyes hooded in contemplation. Not a single groan escaped her, yet a solitary tear traced down her cheek, glinting in the candlelight. Even trembling, the ladies in waiting kept their silence, knowing that even a word of complaint about her hair could be construed as lèse-majesté. Within that solemn rite, the only fragrances were incense and roses. A gilded fan would occasionally sweep away candle smoke, yet even after the ceremony concluded, Elizabeth did not immediately rise from her throne. She remained seated, lifting a miniature portrait of her late mother to her lips, whispering into the gentle breeze, "I am Elizabeth Tudor, indomitable and eternal." Only then did she nod, signalling that the rite was complete and preparing to embark on another day of power and protocol. On ordinary mornings, this ritual consumed 3 to 5 hours to perfect. Court painters and carpenters hovered respectfully by the doorframe, sketching every angle of the wig in preparation for portrait commissions. They knew that without this glorious embellishment, Elizabeth's powder-a-pale face and the tiniest scar would be laid bare enough to shake the very foundations of the throne. When at last the angelic Sue-crowned wig was securely in place, Elizabeth would slowly descend her crimson throne. Each step struck a perfect balance between majestic authority and concealed agony. The deeper the pins embedded, the more composed her stride, as if pain itself were proof of her unparalleled might. In the morning sunlight filtering through stained glass, her chalk-white hairpiece gleamed with a platinum hue, obscuring the centuries-old haze of secrets rotting beneath. Yet there were fleeting moments when Elizabeth suddenly grew silent. Her gaze distant as she stared from the window. She believed no one noticed. But one keen-eyed maid glimpsed a bead of blood tracing down her temple. When the sun climbed higher and the curtain was drawn back, sunlight illuminated each pinned cluster, revealing patches of still-wet adhesive bubbling on her scalp. In those moments, the rustle of whispers reminded her of the mortal flesh beneath her facade, no matter how perfect the surface. On grand state occasions attended by foreign dignitaries, the wig-adorning ritual grew even more elaborate. A court ensemble of harp and recorder would perform, while the priest intoned additional prayers for the kingdom's peace. Those chants echoed through the resplendent chamber. Yet in Elizabeth's heart she heard only one question: can this crown truly sustain my reign for 40 years? The agony of her scalp had weighed on her, and she knew that each time she donned that wig, she willingly imprisoned herself in her own personal hell. When the rite finally concluded, a royal attendant would present a small box containing stimulant powders, a blend of dried herbs to dust the tiny exposed patches of scalp, intended to dry away flakes and counteract odor. Yet whenever the powder touched her tender, moist skin, she would utter a faint moan and wave her hand to signal, enough. No one dared insist, for that was the sole concession to her vulnerability. Thus, each sacred morning ritual not only preserved Elizabeth's immortal image, but served as a painful pact with her power. She endured hours of agony, allowing her decaying flesh to hide beneath that chalk-white crown, so the world saw only her radiant glory. Her body grew ever more exhausted, yet her throne remained as solid as stone, never to be shaken. Now that you have witnessed the Queen's morning wig ceremony, from the blessing of holy water to each pin driven into her skull, prepare for the next chapter. The calling cards, mirrors, and arcane disguise powders that concealed her rotting flesh, even in the glow of royal lamps. The dark journey continues, and the truth behind Elizabeth's towering crown will haunt you forever. And when the sacred ceremony of dawn finally drew to a close, Elizabeth entered her final days with a body that had become an irreparable chemical disaster. Every layer of white lead makeup, every swipe of mercury-laced red lipstick, every drop of toxic Nobeth perfume had seeped deep into her bloodstream, corroding her liver and ravaging her kidneys. Even within the splendor of the royal court, the devoted physicians could only shake their heads before this toxic onslaught. There was no remedy left to neutralize the lead or purge the mercury from Her Majesty's body. The courtiers whispered among themselves when they saw her standing before the mirror. Hair, ghostly white. Skin a sickly yellow, as though rotting from within. Day and night. Her head spun. Her hands trembled in spasms, and her eyelids fluttered in restless insomnia. Her nerves were so frayed that even the sound of a harp string sent waves of dread through her. And the twitter of swallows outside the window made her heart feel as though it would plunge into an abyss. In moments of panic, she would clutch the ebony bedposts, struggling to maintain composure and conceal any sign of weakness. As fate's whisper drew nearer, Elizabeth lay drenched upon her gilded canopy bed, refusing to let a single drop of water touch skin that had grown accustomed only to wax and powder. Despite the ladies in waiting's pleading, She rejected every damp cloth, scented oil, or rosewater rinse. Her fear of water burned deeper than any fleshly pain. The physicians were forced to apply dry dressings, dusting her sores with powdered salves and using pure cotton to bandage her ulcers. But the effect was only to make her feel parched and to startle her as the wounds contracted. Every entry into her sick room sent shivers through the court. Her Majesty looked like a grotesque statue. Her yellowed skin stretched taut into deep folds. Her eyes dimmed as though on the brink of extinguishing. They had to reinforce her coffin twice, just to contain the stench of decay that threatened to fill Westminster Abbey, first with a thick oak shell, then a tightly sealed lead lining, and finally draped in black velvet to trap the fetid air. Yet the horrific odour still pierced every barrier, leaving the guards gasping for breath. A gifted lady-in-waiting who had tended her for nearly 6 years whispered to a confidant behind the curtain, "I have served every glory the crown could bestow, yet I have never beheld flesh so hideously ravaged." Those words, recorded in a private court journal, were enough to haunt any reader, as though the stench itself clung to their garments. And it wasn't only the smell. The sight was more shocking still. Bed linens stained a dull grey, soaked through with thick yellow fluid from wounds that never healed. Here, Elizabeth closed her eyes to eternity without peace, whispering the names of youthful memories walks along the Cherwell, laughter in the rose garden at Lansdowne, now faded echoes lost in a tunnel of chemical torment. The physicians, after checking her pulse and respirations, reported lead levels in her blood tens of times above normal, mercury crystallizing in her kidneys, and early signs of central nervous system damage, convulsions, confusion, disorientation. All they could do was take turns standing vigil at her bedside like mourners, praying for a miracle that never came. In her final hour, Elizabeth still resolutely refused the physician's last whispered counsel. "Your Majesty, breathe deeply of this scented steam to cleanse yourself." She shook her head and waved away the offering. Instead, she drew a pristine linen handkerchief, gently smoothing the last hollows of her haggard cheeks, and murmured, "Water is not for me." Then she closed her eyes as if a goddess departing the mortal realm. The final collapse echoed through the chamber. Her chest rose in one last heave, then stilled, her breath slipping away. The ladies in waiting burst into tears. The elderly priest collapsed from exhaustion, and the 3 guards exchanged solemn glances in horror. Her Majesty, who once defied death with her lavish artifices, had at last succumbed to life's inevitable end. When the coffin was sealed, the royal architects reinforced the tomb walls and fortified the casket one final time, not only to slow decomposition, but to lock in the fetid odour. Westminster Abbey had never before witnessed a sepulchre so notorious for its escaping stench, not even in the reign of Henry VIII. Yet Elizabeth shattered every record, leaving behind a legacy not only of power, but of a horrifying tale of flesh fused with chemical ruin. And thus, Queen Elizabeth I, who lived a life of unparalleled luxury, ended her mortal journey, burdened by the very creations she had wrought. Layers of chalky white lead, her majestic wigs, the cruel hairpins, and an enduring fear of water. Her body sank into darkness, but the story of her chemical catastrophe resonates on, reminding posterity that power cannot defeat death, and that artificial beauty will eventually be undone by the very toxins used to create it. And so the funeral of Queen Elizabeth I began in almost unbelievable chaos. The coffin, draped in deep red velvet, trimmed with pure gold tassels, rested upon a finely carved hearse. Atop its lid lay a wax mask, recreating her eternal beauty, her lips sewn shut to hide a rigid smile. Her hands slipped into white gloves, like porcelain. Beneath that sumptuous velvet, the corpse was undergoing furious decomposition. Though the public remained unaware of the horrific secret below, the cortege wound its way through London's grand avenues, past Trafalgar Square and into Westminster Abbey, crowds stood in solemn rows, heads shrouded in mourning cloth. Ishradrimad. They expected reverent music and the faint scent of incense. Instead, a wave of rank stench billowed from the coffin. Heat from the rotting body mingled with beeswax to produce an indescribable sulphuric odour. Many officials were unprepared and had to rotate in shifts along the hearse's flanks, unable to endure the clash of glory and decay. Inside the abbey, bishops in white vestments strove to maintain solemn composure. The distant tolling of bells heralded honour. Yet behind the scenes, attendants shuffled positions, 2 physicians and 5 guards, taking turns watching the coffin. One gripping a handkerchief to his brow, another steadying a comrade to prevent fainting. Several diplomatic entourages folded their banners and departed before the rites concluded, the stench invading too deeply. All eyes focused on the velvet-covered casket, hearing only the dull drumbeat marking each step and the whispered commands of the marshals. Halt! Open the triple doors. Move on. In moments, fresh flowers, primarily white lilies and red roses, blanketed the aisle, yet could not outweigh the fetid odour fused with incense. More censers were lit and baskets of blooms heaped atop the coffin. But the effort to hide the stench was all but futile. Outside the abbey gates, children scurried about, gathering petals fallen on the pavement. They peeked at the procession, unaware of the rot hidden beneath the silken shroud. Some young noblemen even saluted the immortal angel with grand bows, while the stench slipped inside their cloaks, clinging to the fringes of their doublets. When the ceremony seemed to reach its climax, the coffin was lowered into the crypt beneath the earth. Royal architects and carpenters swiftly sealed its lid, installed concrete blocks and ventilation tubes, and fortified it with 2 layers of stone doors and a pair of thick oak hatches, finally draping it in black velvet to contain the odour. Westminster Abbey never before seeing a casket so notorious for its escaping stench. Not even in the time of Henry VIII bore witness to Elizabeth's record-breaking decay. No sooner had the final velvet curtain fallen than a trumpet and drum ensemble burst into the national anthem, as if to erase every whiff of rot from the great church. In that moment, many attendants covered their faces and hurried outside to breathe fresh air, passing around small cups of fine wine to mask the lingering acrid taste. Even the tea that followed the funeral was sparsely attended. The remaining ladies-in-waiting could only muster the courage to set out a few almond cakes and trays of tea. They sat in silence, their palates torn between bitter tea and the memory of fetid stench. A moment later, someone muttered, "We are drinking tea beside an eternal mound of rot," an offhand remark that cut like a blade. Yet the public outside saw only the resplendent pageantry, composite portraits of the Queen gleaming in gilded frames, laudatory poems from esteemed writers, and solemn orations by the Prime Minister. They praised her victories, her virtue, and her wisdom. No one spoke of decaying teeth, putrid bath, or rancid breath. Still, history preserved the hushed lament of those who attended her funeral. I never thought I would live to speak of the Queen's stench. These rare diary entries, housed in the British Library, attest to one truth. Behind grandeur lay a carnage of flesh. Behind power, a rising tide of horror. Today, when visitors light candles and lay flowers at Elizabeth's tomb in Westminster Abbey, they drift into a distant past. The scent of fresh blooms mingling with lingering incense. Few realize that beneath the cold marble her body still decays. And sometimes, on silent nights, the wind through the stone fissures carries a ragged tang of rot to punish any brave soul lingering too long. And when all the solemn rituals had ended, Queen Elizabeth I closed her life with an image that was at once magnificent and horrifying. On the stage of power, she was the victor over enemies. She banished the threat of the Spanish Armada, ushered in a brilliant Renaissance, and patronized the flourishing of arts and sciences. Contemporaries hailed her as the emblem of a golden age, a guiding light for all of Europe. Yet behind that glory, her obsession with immortal beauty and supreme authority slowly destroyed her body. Every layer of white lead makeup drawn from Venetian ceruse, every pot of mercury-red lipstick, every bottle of Neubath toxic perfume seeped deep into her bloodstream, accumulated in her liver, and ravaged her kidneys. The poisonous baths, the regal wigs, the pins driven into her skin all became treacherous. Weapons turned against her. Her once invincible body finally revealed its terrible vulnerabilities. Bones fracturing at the joints, skin peeling away like rotting wood, nerves stretched so tight that the pain became excruciating. The story of Elizabeth I reminds us that great power carries heavy responsibility. Reputation and might cannot be bought at the expense of human dignity, and no mortal flesh should be forced to endure such lethal artifices. When beauty becomes an illusion, the body pays the price in pain and decay. For the sleepy audience listening, let this be the lullaby's final refrain. Sometimes beauty lives forever in memory, but the body inevitably crumbles with time. Let your dreams be gentler than your fears. Let every tale of history teach and inspire, rather than serve as a stark reminder of human frailty. And do not forget to follow other stories of great but surprising historical figures, where the light of glory and the darkness of decay always intersect. Not long after her funeral, her body found no rest. Decomposition proceeded faster than anyone had imagined. Inside that resplendent coffin, the court physicians at first blamed simply old age and London's damp climate. In truth, it was the legacy of decades of white lead, red mercury, and toxic perfumes soaked into her blood. Her liver swelled, her kidneys softened, and her central nervous system unraveled. The skin beneath her eyes ballooned into dark pouches. Her lips turned a bruised, inky black. Her jaw cracked open, revealing blackened, rotting teeth, and her mouth exuded a thick, foul discharge. The stench grew so overpowering that the chamber housing her coffin became unbearable. The court entourage placed basins of cold vinegar all around the casket and burned incense constantly. But the incense smoke only offered slight relief. The acidic, sweet haze still spread throughout the sanctuary. Even her most loyal attendants could not escape the horror. They covered their mouths, bowed their heads, and some fainted upon witnessing the ghastly scene. The coffin was reinforced twice, first with thick oak planks, then sealed with a tight layer of lead, and finally draped in black velvet to lock in the stench. All these efforts only partially contained the odour and could not fully seal it away. Many officials, after their shifts guarding the bier, had to request sick leave to recover their nerves. They dared not reveal the truth to the public, fearing that the Queen's rotting corpse would haunt the realm beneath the velvet shroud, scented with cinnamon. Elizabeth's effigy remained venerated as an immortal symbol, while in reality a fetid corpse lay decaying deep within Westminster Abbey. Official records note, the air in the vault became nearly unbreathable. Even the lead-lined doors seemed to weep. The guards staggered before the coffin, lamps shaking in their hands, fearing that if a single crack opened, the entire abbey would be engulfed in filth. These words echo like a historical verdict, irrefutable proof of the final chemical catastrophe of a storied reign. And so, Queen Elizabeth I, who had lived the most lavish life, could not ultimately escape the rules of mortality. Her body sank into the damp darkness of the crypt, but the tale of her flesh fused with chemicals continues to reverberate across time, reminding posterity that power and artificial beauty, however brilliant, cannot outrun death nor evade the dire consequences they unleash. When Queen Elizabeth I's coffin departed Westminster Abbey and rolled onto the Grand Boulevard of London, the entire city seemed to freeze in awe at its unprecedented splendour. The hearse, looking as if it bore an immortal goddess, was draped entirely in deep red velvet, embroidered with shimmering gold thread, and atop it sat a miraculous wax likeness of her radiant face. On either side of the street, Citizens kneeled in solemn reverence, their heads covered in black mourning cloth, tears tracing down their cheeks as the sonorous notes of the harp and pipe organ sounded her farewell. Yet beneath that silken splendor lay a horrifying truth. The Queen's decaying body exuded such a powerful stench that the guards stationed at the coffin had to rotate their vigil every 10 minutes. London's damp climate only amplified the odor, making the air around the hearse thick as coal smoke. Each trio of guards would stagger away at the end of their shift, gasping for fresh air, as the stifling miasma of death overwhelmed them. To add to the nightmare, flies and other insects recognized the coffin as a feast. Swarms of black flies buzzed over the velvet, slipping through every filthy gap. Beneath the hearse, the damp underside of the cloth became a breeding ground for maggots, yellow pus, and rotting flesh. Passers-by, jogging nearby, hurriedly covered their noses, ducked their heads, and breathed shallowly to avoid inhaling the toxic fumes. At one point, the procession halted so medical attendants could erect plastic tarpaulins, but even that proved no match for the bloodthirsty insects. Amid the chaos, the court painters worked in hushed urgency, sketching and then painting over every trace of reality to present Elizabeth as eternally youthful and vibrant. They were instructed to erase every wrinkle from her brow, blur the pockmarks from smallpox, and render her skin perfectly luminescent in candlelight. Any brown spot or crimson streak that hinted at the truth was meticulously wiped away because even a single, real detail could shake the throne's image in the eyes of the public. Backstage, there were whispered horrors of the stench seeping into every canvas, and the soft, lingering moans echoing like a funeral dirge. But all such talk was swiftly expunged by the royal censors. The final portrait had to exude majestic grace, an immortal smile, and sovereign pride, so that the populace would remember only an invincible queen, ignorant of the fact that her flesh had become the stuff of nightmares. The crowd along the route watched the splendid carriage, unaware that each turn of its wheels sent another wave of foul air toward them. They saw only the white lilies and red roses lining the streets, believing the flowers conveyed purity, while in truth those petals soon served to mask the smell of insects and rotting flesh. Many laid down bouquets and pressed kisses to her image, convinced they honored a benevolent monarch, all the while breathing in a mixture of death's perfume, tears, and incense. Even the European diplomatic delegations in their formal attire could not stay the course. Within minutes, many envoys discreetly retreated, their hands trembling as they tried to maintain decorum while the stench filled the air. They hastily penned warnings back to their courts. The procession must not endure too long, lest it inflict unforeseeable harm on those exposed. When the hearse reached the gates of Westminster Abbey for the second time, the royal architects and carpenters stood ready to install the concrete base, line it with lead, and seal it behind 2 heavy stone doors. They worked through the night by flickering oil lamps beneath the vaulted ceiling, the crack of hammers and roar of saws echoing through the crypt. Some workers recoiled when the once-a pristine black velvet, now soaked with black fluid and streaked with pus, marred the handy-stitched embroidery, but no one dared inform the public. The horror must remain hidden to preserve the immortal angel image. At last, the drums fell silent. The cortege withdrew, and Elizabeth I's coffin sank into the flickering candlelight. In the hush that followed, only the hurried footsteps of departing guards and the soft prayers of the ladies in awaiting remained. It is said that in that dim moment one could hear the faint creak of the corpse inside the coffin, a chilling reminder that behind the dazzling pageantry lay a body rotting away. And when the final stone doors slammed shut, the solemn grandeur of Westminster Abbey outside remained unshaken. Yet in the hearts of all who witnessed, the lesson of power's transience and the lurking danger in artificial adornments from lead makeup to toxic chemicals had been seared indelibly. They bowed before the throne of a queen, both mighty and tragic, before a veil of supreme glory pierced by the stench of decay and nameless dread. Remember this. The public saw only the lavish carriage of the immortal goddess. But in truth it was the journey of a decaying corpse through the grand avenue of renown, leaving behind an indelible stain of a once-glorious reign inexorably bound to the destruction of the body. And this is but the final chapter of her life. Many more mysteries and thrilling tales behind her Westminster tomb await in the next installments. As soon as the final stone slab sealed the Queen's coffin off from the world above, the embalming workshop commenced its most exacting work. The examination and preservation of the body, flickering oil lamps cast pale light upon the cold marble table, where the royal morticians, masters of surgery and preservation, laid out their mother-of-pearl inlaid instruments, steel scalpels, curettes, vials of aromatic oils, jars of balsam resin, and sacks of pure white salt. From her brow to her heels, they discovered a multitude of chemical burns, etched like black scars across her flesh. The Queen's once slender arms now bore festering blisters oozing greenish-yellow discharge. The skin of her abdomen was taut as calf hide, splitting along blackened veins to reveal liquefied fat beneath. When they opened her torso to remove the viscera, they recoiled in horror. Her organs were charred black as coal. Her liver was swollen to 3 times its normal size, crusted in foul black scales and exhaling a rank stench. Her lungs were clogged with filthy sediment, congealed like poultice remnants, proof that she had inhaled lead-laden powder and toxic fragrances for many years. The moment they pierced her stomach, a cloud of noxious gas erupted, leaving all who stood nearby gasping, hands trembling as they dropped their scalpels. When the dissection reached her brainstem, the physicians stood aghast. The very organ once lauded for her intellect lay decayed, mottled a deep brown, and crumbling to the touch. They refused to describe its condition in detail, murmuring only that such decomposition was unprecedented in royal history. Even her spinal cord, the conduit of life, was nearly destroyed, its remaining nerve fibers brittle and tangled like strands of black cobweb. Despite their revulsion, their duty was not done. The corpse had to be expertly treated for long-term display and interment. They meticulously bathed it in costly frankincense oil, filled her body cavity with precious resin, and packed it with salt from the famed mines of Coahan to draw out moisture and disinfect. Every crevice was anointed with an antibacterial balm, then wrapped in multiple layers of linen. Yet each time the coffin lid was lifted even slightly, a violent wave of foul odor burst forth, seeping through the salt and resin until the morticians were forced to close their eyes and clench dark silk scarves over their faces. Deep within Westminster's chill crypt, the air grew increasingly oppressive. Even these priceless preservatives, Goldworth oils, resin, so rare it rivaled gems, and desiccating salts proved powerless against the corpse's assault. The incense offered warmth, the resin lent a sharp aroma, and the salt absorbed moisture, but none could fully contain the putrescence. They reinforced the vault with concrete ledges and a pair of heavy stone doors, then sewed a border of black velvet around the coffin's edge, as if adding a final armor to hold back the inexorable decay. Each guard and physician took turns, standing vigil over her coffin like guardians of a sacred relic. At times they summoned silversmiths to weld lead into any cracks, but the metal quickly tarnished black and exuded rust-like streaks. The stench insinuated itself through the tiniest seams, clinging to metal armor and steel helmets, driving men to remove their headgear in desperate gasps. Several on the first watches could not endure the air through the night. They had to seek convalescent leave from the court physician to recover. Above ground, the palace gleamed in candlelight, but below, Westminster's crypt had become a nightmare engine. On one occasion, a senior architect discovered a dried pumpkin rind fallen near the crypt entrance, its yellow pulp stained by the corpse's fluids, creating a slick, blackened path. He quietly swept it aside, murmuring, "We build our future atop the remains of this catastrophe." How? Amid this epic horror, only whispered commands echoed among the high officials. Maintain total secrecy. The public must never know. The censorship apparatus was mobilized to the fullest. Every file, medical journal, and surgeon's note was stamped top secret. Even the last Tudor family member who glimpsed the true photographs was quietly confined, to prevent any leak of the ghastly truth. Yet the dread could not be fully hidden. Whenever the temperature rose, the stench surged anew, forcing Westminster's crypt doors shut for months. For the first time in its history, the Abbey's council postponed its annual ceremonies. They could not hold a service amid that fetid miasma. All available funds were diverted to crypt reinforcement, intended to preserve discretion and stem the odor's escape. Only after the final stone doors were fastened, the last grains of salt packed tight against the flesh, and the resin dried to a crust, did the crypt fall into uneasy quiet. But even veteran embalmers shook their heads in despair. This is the worst decomposition we have ever witnessed. Even the bodies of defeated kings did not decay so swiftly and so foul. And so, Queen Elizabeth I, who had employed every artifice to ensure her name would endure, became the epicenter of the most terrible chemical disaster in English royal law. Her body, meticulously preserved and sealed, stands as a silent testament to the cost of power and the vain quest for immortality, no matter how lavishly cloaked in velvet and ceremony. The flesh cannot resist the ravages of chemistry. Now that you have seen the grotesque burns, the coal-black organs, and the mortician's dread, prepare for the next chapter. We will explore the mysteries surrounding her coffin deep in the vault, the whispers of wind through stone cracks, and the legends of the late sovereign's spirit still turning to ash within Canterbury's crypt. The world holds more secrets yet, and the curse of the immortal queen continues to haunt humankind through the ages. When the final stone doors closed, sealing the queen's coffin away from the world above, it seemed her story had ended yet another. Far more haunting chapter began. Even after more than 4 centuries, the legend of Elizabeth I's tomb in Westminster Abbey still chills those who speak of it. Pilgrims visiting her burial site insist they sometimes catch a fleeting scent of rose. But it is not the pure aroma of fresh petals. It is tainted with a faint but unmistakable odor of decaying bone. Countless white wreaths and incense sticks have been laid around her ledger stone, tokens of remembrance and attempts to soothe her restless spirit. Perhaps amid the rising smoke and dying blossoms, visitors hope to find a moment of peace, or at least to pray that her soul may finally rest. Yet on still, moonless nights, many swear they hear a soft whisper echoing down the dark halls. The immortal queen, the immortal queen. The voice seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Sometimes distant, sometimes right beside you, a relentless reminder that no matter how mighty one's power, time and death spare no one. Legend holds that an elderly priest, Imboltner after Vespers, once ventured into the crypt to offer incense and prayer, only to hear the cracking of bones and the faint continuation of that whispered refrain beneath the vaults. He recoiled in terror, his censer dropped, his mourning cloth slipped, overcome with sobs as he felt the presence of something undying at his shoulder. Though science offers no explanation, many remain convinced that Elizabeth's spirit never fully departed the place she once ruled. It is this mingling of awe and dread that gives her legend its vivid power. Citizens and foreign travellers struck silent before the tale of the immortal queen. Carry that story back into the world as a cautionary lesson. No matter how glorious one's reign, it is paid for by a mortal frame. Each bouquet laid, each incense cone lit in that ancient chapel becomes a timeless plea to live fully in the present before one, too, becomes part of legend or part of a nameless horror. Thus, Queen Elizabeth I, icon of England's power and refinement, left behind a legacy rife with contradiction. Her iron will and diplomatic genius are extolled by history, yet behind that splendor lies a harrowing tragedy of ambition and illusion. the rotten bathwater, the blackened teeth, the lethal lead makeup, all the ghastly details were buried deep within the court's secret archives. History often celebrates her triumph over the Spanish Armada, the golden glow of the English Renaissance, and her porcelain-like portraits in candlelight. But when the sumptuous pageantry fades, we see not only a grisly tale of velvet and ritual, but also a profound reminder. Do not allow image and fame to become shackles, trapping you in a cycle of fear and desire. For the sleepy audience listening tonight, this is more than a macabre royal anecdote. It is a tender lullaby. The truest beauty may not lie in fleeting grandeur, but in peaceful memories unburdened by worry. Let your dreams be gentler than your anxieties, so that every sweep of history becomes a source of lessons and inspiration, not the weight of your own ambitions. And as you close your eyes, remember, real power emerges from the heart and character, not from mere appearances. Do not let any artificial glow overshadow your humanity. We will continue to guide you through history's hidden corners, where secrets and legends still await discovery. Sleep well, and dream sweeter than these dark tales. If you enjoy mysterious, chilling stories filled with insight, please subscribe to our channel so you won't miss our newest and finest videos. Until next time, farewell, and may your journey through history's mysteries be ever enthralling.